We don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years, let alone in 1 year. So the only way you can walk on this journey and have people come with you on this journey is to say, look, I'm going to scout and I promise I'll tell you what's going on, even when it's not great news, right? Because what we have anxiety around is mostly the unknown.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Our community is growing. A good way to stay in contact with all the amazing stuff going on is to join our newsletter. There'll be a link in the show notes. I think we're pushing 100 episodes of that. Great way to get some fun facts and sometimes some fun elements of the show that don't always make it into the final version. Now, we are all in this together. When I say this, I mean this global experiment with AI and with what it means to be a human. If you enjoy today's episode, or any other for that matter, share it with just one friend. That's all I ask. They'll know you care about using AI to make humans better. And you know what? If someone you know shared this with you, tell them thanks and pay it forward. If you leave a comment, I just may share it in an upcoming episode. Like this one from Jamil, who is a filmmaker in London. Jamil's favorite episode is that really memorable one from season 4 with Neil Mant, Emmy award-winning producer and entrepreneur, about the future of AI in Hollywood. Of course, we learn about AI from thought leaders each week, and the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact. Today's Some Fact comes from Kim Laquan, who writes in the World Economic Forum about how on-device AI can help us cut AI's energy demand. For context, he says, AI chip power consumption has surged, particularly in data centers, which require vast energy resources to process large-scale data in real time. AI-driven data centers, primarily powered by GPUs, now consume more electricity than entire nations, including South Africa and Indonesia. The solution will involve both a combination of technology and policy. On the tech side, software optimization can help reduce power usage in servers, but on-device AI, where AI processing happens directly on the device rather than in a cloud data center, is a very promising solution as well. On the policy side, to promote energy-efficient AI, a global energy credit trading system could provide financial incentives for companies that adopt low-power AI solutions. Under this system, businesses implementing energy-saving AI could trade energy usage credits, which would financially benefit them while reducing their environmental footprint. Of course, we'll link to that full article in the show notes. My commentary: AI services should be required to publish their energy requirements as human-readable digital labels, much like ingredients on food packages or energy consumption metrics on things like refrigerators and microwaves. As consumers, we may or may not choose to read the digital labels, but I contend most of us actually care about how AI consumes energy, if for no other reason than because it contributes significantly to what we pay for AI. Like with home solar, we might make different decisions about which vendors to use or even when to consume AI if energy demands weren't so opaque. As consumer AI services become commoditized, I would like the equivalent of a monthly screen usage time report with a breakdown of my AI usage by service, costs, and energy consumption. If you're an entrepreneur working on that, let me know. It's something that needs to exist. Now, shifting to this week's great conversation, Tracy Layney is one of the most seasoned and recognized Chief Human Resources Officers, or CHROs, around, having led the people and culture organizations at Levi's, Gap, and Shutterfly over the past 15 years. She's currently an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, where she teaches a course on human capital strategy. Tracy received her BA in English from the University of Pennsylvania Quakers, thanks to mutual friend and great former guest Brian Elliott for the introduction to Tracy. If you haven't listened to Brian's episode, go back and listen to it. It's a great one. And without further ado, Tracy, it is really my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about your background and how you got into the space.
Oh, thanks so much, Dan. And thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to be with you. So I, as you mentioned, I've spent most of my career in human resources, although I did not start my career there. And I think it's important to go all the way back. I appreciate the shout out to the Quakers. I did start my academic journey at the University of Pennsylvania. And to be honest, I had no vision of being in HR at that time. I was an English major. I was debating two career paths. One was becoming an English professor. So it is fun to have some academia in my current reality at University of Chicago. But I debated becoming a professor of English literature or a lawyer, as a lot of English majors do. So, and then I was really leaning to going to law school. And then one of my first jobs out of college was actually at a law firm. And no offense to any of the attorneys listening, but I quickly decided that was not for me. And through a series of events, including a professor I was really close with, and ended up in consulting, actually, strategy consulting. And that I fell in love with that career path. And I say that's so important to my, what then became a much, fast forward to a much deeper career in HR, was I really, came at business from the perspective of organizational strategy, right? Every business wakes up and thinks about how to operate and be successful and deliver shareholder value. And I would say, in my experience, unfortunately, of 25 years plus, very few have actually figured out how to leverage the best of the people side of their business, right? So I started as a consultant, mostly at PwC, and then pivoted into the companies that you mentioned, where I really learned the nuts and bolts of HR. But I even made that pivot, and this is still something I believe firmly to this day, is that, it's one thing to say talent is our most important asset, and it's another thing to actually act like it and operate like it. And so what I've tried to do, as I've had this, amazing career in human resources, is really be the person that wakes up and thinks about that, and is the person who also encourages others in the organization to do that. And I know we'll talk about this in depth, but especially as we have this new realm of AI, I think that is going to be more important than ever. So that's really how I've built spent my time these last, couple decades. And it really still is my first love.
You've been a leader as part of so many iconic cultures, and you've been around so many iconic leaders. Share with us a story about how you are, or how you became who you are, based on maybe some of the leaders or role models you've worked with.
Oh, yeah. I think that's so important. And I have had the privilege of working with amazing leaders, and really choosing, I think, very intentionally companies that have had really strong values, whether that was Gap Inc. or Shutterfly or Levi's. And I'll share more about those. But, my leadership philosophy that I learned by working with these amazing folks at these amazing companies has really been the combination of the following: that really setting our sights on excellence, right? Like, we want to achieve the highest and best that our company can achieve, that our team can achieve, that we individually can achieve. And there's something about that that is really motivating. And again, because I've also worked at iconic companies like Gap Inc. and Old Navy, specifically within Gap Inc., but just the whole company overall. And then Levi's, of course, such an iconic company that created this entire, something we all of us wear every single day, practically, 170 years ago, with the blue jean. But also just a brand that means so much to so many people, that striving for excellence at places that really, again, have had huge impact in the world is something that's always really resonated with me. So just how do we continue that excellence, and doing that by making sure we are providing values-driven, heart-centered environments where people can do their best work. Because I really think it is the both and, right? I talk a lot about the what and the how, right? It's how we achieve this excellence. We do it by having a collaborative, supportive environment where, whether I'm somebody's boss or peer or direct report, we know we show up for each other every day. And I've learned from amazing leaders by doing that. I was studied under this fantastic chief HR officer for my 10 years at Gap, where I learned this profession. Her name is Gavin, and she's still a close friend and mentor. And then, Chip Bergh, who was the CEO for the majority of my tenure at Levi's, I'll never forget, I started at Levi's a week into the pandemic. We were a week into lockdown. And Levi's is, for those who don't, obviously, I think everyone knows what Levi's is, but you may not know in 50 countries around the world, 20,000 employees. So literally every part of the globe, and every part of the globe was being impacted by COVID. Our primary job was to keep people safe. And our next primary job was to make sure the company survived, right? I mean, that if we all put ourselves back in that moment, there was so little certainty. And I'll never forget, I had a conversation very early on. I mean, I was virtual. I think I'd been at the job maybe less than 2 weeks. And Chip, who had been a very successful CEO of the company, had been there at that point 8 or 9 years. We had a real heartfelt conversation about, this company has a storied brand that, basically got through 2 world wars and a Great Depression and survived and thrived and is an employer to so many, as well as playing a meaningful role in our consumers and customers' lives. Like, this has to survive on our watch. And the stakes that requires, and I remember feeling at the time, but also knowing that because of the company's values, Chip's values, but also the company's long legacy of values, that we were going to do everything we could in our power to also help the people of LS & Co., of Levi Strauss & Co., navigate this uncertainty, right? So that and by doing that, we had faith that we would make the best decision we could every day, again, in this face of tremendous uncertainty. And if we just did that every single day, that the company would survive and the people would survive at that point and thrive, and we would come through what was a really rough period. But those are some, I'll never forget that moment, because it was just, I think sometimes we forget the stakes that go on for us as employers and companies in the world. And I think the pandemic certainly crystallized that, but those aren't the only moments. And so again, how you continue to strive to be the best we can be as an organization, as teams, as individuals, and doing that by providing the supportive environment that enables people to be their best. That's what I think that secret sauce is, and how I've always tried to show up as a leader, and what I've learned from the leaders I've had the tremendous privilege of working with.
Beautifully said. So we've recently had some interesting conversations about the future of kind of a more enlightened HR with Alex Buter-Shapiro, who's Chief People Officer from Jasper, and Josh Burson, who you might know, industry analyst in the HR tech space, our mutual friend Brian Elliott. And there were two things that I heard you say in that reply that designate you as an enlightened HR leader. You said you talked about heart-centric leadership, and you said, strive for excellence. And that great story with, Chip during the pandemic. And I got to imagine that the Tracy that entered the world of HR, whatever it was, 15 plus years ago, was part of a different HR culture. What does today's Tracy tell to that version of Tracy when you talk about what's ahead?
Yeah, I think, certainly the world has evolved so much, right? It's the workforce in general, of which HR plays a critically important role. So by that definition, and those other folks that you've had on the show would, obviously have reflected this as well, that, the world of HR has changed dramatically as well. And I just expect that, by the way, to continue at pace, given what's in front of us. So, I think we can talk about, certainly the profession has been through evolutions now for going back, many decades, even before I got into it. And I think, I came into it really because I came from the consulting side and the strategy side. Like, I've always been the person who shows up and thinks, okay, this is our business strategy. This is what we have to deliver, or these are the challenges we're facing, whether it's a growth challenge or a turnaround challenge or a pandemic challenge or whatever those things are, an AI challenge. Here's what our business needs to do to meet this challenge. And therefore, what does our human capital strategy have to be? What does our people strategy have to be? And what are all the components that we need to make sure we are thinking about organizationally, or from a talent perspective, or from a culture perspective, to deliver on those aspirations, right? And that's where my basic training came from. And I think that's how I've always approached this profession. What has happened subsequently has been there's so many more, I'd say, challenges, right? There's so many more things for us in corporate life to have to wrestle with, that because of this role, we are in this heart of and at the forefront of. Of course, we have continued disruptive technologies, which I'm old enough to remember the advent of the internet, right? So like, this is, in my work life even. And now we're seeing that with AI, right? And what's coming. And I think we were just barely beginning to grasp the implications for workplaces, right? And I think our initial takes are pretty rudimentary, and we're going to know more exponentially over time. So that's upon us. What also, though, has happened in the last 10 years or more is just, multiple geopolitical crises, a global pandemic, this reckoning with racial injustice and a focus on that, and now a backlash against DEI, right, that we're seeing. Again, so many crises that I can't even name. I mean, when I talk to my team from Levi's about what we did in my almost 5 years there, I mean, it's the kind of things that would have taken 10 or 15 or 20 years that we would normally have to deal with, right? And HR is at the center of all of this because we wake up every day and think about the employee experience. Employee expectations of companies change, right? We still have the natural expansion and contraction in the economy driven by normal cycles or, again, disruptive technology. But we're doing that, and we're also doing 15 more things, as well as trying to figure out how to optimize our own organizations now with AI, or our own HR teams, or what is even the role of this profession going to be going forward, right? So it's just constant. And so I think, if I were to go back and talk to my younger self, I would say, I probably wouldn't say do much different. I would just say use every opportunity to learn, because what's going to come, you can't even really anticipate. And we're all going to have to really lean into growth mindset and lean into learning to be able to continue to evolve as leaders. And by the way, that's the advice I give myself now, because what's coming with AI and everything else, or just in the world that I just described, does not change. We still have all of those external pressures and uncertainties that we need to really continue to understand how to evolve, adapt, and learn in the face of a future that isn't as certain and maybe hasn't been for a long time. And so how do we, take the gifts that uncertainty gives us to really help create a better future?
Picking up on that theme of the constant evolution between the relationship that employees have with their employer, puzzle with me through this one. Many employees, I'd say the majority of all employees these days, are feeling somewhere between a little and very, very apprehensive about the future of their role, maybe their field. Did they make the right decision? And all of a sudden, the role of HR is morphing because Tracy's crystal ball isn't, it's a little cloudy, just like we're all learning this in real time. And yet enlightened HR is looked at as kind of a stabilizing force and someplace you go to for counsel and comfort. And we don't always have the right answers. How does that conversation between HR and the employee change when there's some amount of assurance or a guiding hand that HR may not always be able to provide?
Yeah, I think that's, I hope what you're describing is true, in that if folks have a trusted relationship with HR, that they would look to HR for guidance and support, and hopefully not just HR, hopefully leaders in the company as well. So I think there's a couple of things. One, we all know that's not always the case. That's one issue. But even in what you're describing, let's assume it is the case. I'm not going to in any way equate the current moment to the pandemic, but it is instructive, right? And I also was in the workforce during the financial crisis. And those were both two big moments, right, that really impacted the whole globe, that were very, very disruptive and created a lot of uncertainty, and people lost their jobs. It was the same thing that, we may be dealing with now, I think with slightly different flavor. And so what I've found in both of those experiences, that how you garner trust with employees and how you've done it in all the moments in between, right? Not just in crisis, but in daily life, is to be open, authentic, and transparent. Right? As open, authentic, and transparent as you possibly can be, including saying, I don't actually know. I think it's really okay to say, I don't know, but here's what I do know. I'm making it up, right? I don't know how AI is going to disrupt engineering jobs in this company in the next couple of years, but here's what I do know. What I do know is we're going to take a thoughtful approach. We're going to explore our best options. We're going to do it in partnerships with leaders who understand this organization, understand how to best optimize this. And we're going to let you know how it goes along the way. If, worst case happens, because I've laid off more people in my lifetime than I would ever care to admit, because it's just part of the job, that when we have to make the hardest decisions, we will do so with empathy and clarity and care, so that even as we go forward into this moment of uncertainty together, we promise you we will bring you on the journey with us, and that you will know what's going on. And I think that is just great leadership, frankly. And I think HR can play that role and can play that leadership role, but I don't think it's just HR. I think all leaders can do that. It's about this, it's that second part of the excellence plus sort of the support and nurturing of a team, which is to say, look, I will be honest with you as we go through this. And right now, I may not know the answer. And I think that's the reality right now. I think in my experience, people get really anxious when they don't know what's happening. And right now, we're at a moment where a lot of us don't know what's happening. I mean, I don't know what's happening, right? So we just talked about that. It's a cloudy crystal ball. And by the way, I think that's true for everybody. I mean, we see the articles every day. This CEO declares this amount of savings. This CEO declares this amount of savings. And then you see the follow-up article a week later and they're like, well, maybe not, right? Because I get that. And by the way, this is so novel and going so fast that even if we have an answer today, that answer is going to be completely different in 6 months or a year or in 2 years. We don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years, let alone in 1 year. So and so that's where, the only way you can walk on this journey and have people come with you on this journey is to say, look, I'll be slightly out ahead. I'll see what I can. I'm going to scout, and I promise I'll tell you what's going on, even when it's not great news, right? Even when it's not good news, because when people know that, that's when they'll have trust. And actually, I think it really also decreases anxiety, because what we have anxiety around is mostly the unknown. And I think we're looking at a future that is mostly very unknown, like we were in some of these other examples, and there's tremendous possibility and promise and, excitement, and all that's great. And people every time I listen to your guests, there's such exciting things happening, and that's great. And the reality is there's also a lot of fear. And so the best we can do is help people navigate the fear as much as we can.
Those things like authenticity and your leadership style and trust building, those aren't arbitrary. Those are also the things that distinguish us from AI, from non-sentient technologies that we interact with. I would say the difference, me on a soapbox, is previous disruptive technologies like, say, the mobile phone or the internet browser or cloud computing never force us to ask existential questions about humanity. What's our role on the planet? And so I think that is causing us to have a whole different level of questions or conversation at work. So if you, as a people leader, you're trying to build a culture where, let's say, we want to build trust, not just with each other, but also that we're going to provide tools that support your continuous learning journey. How do you create a culture where employees feel like AI and these new, emergent technologies are allies instead of adversaries, when you know that they're going to be a little concerned when you bring up the topic?
Absolutely. And rightly so. I mean, that's a very human reaction. I mean, I started my career back in early days of consulting, doing what we call change management, which I know we still use that term. I've actually not really liked that term for a long time, because I think it sort of inherently implies a from to, like it was this and now it's this. And I think large scale, I'm really dating myself, like ERP implementations or things like the technologies you mentioned, there was a little bit of a from to. Your job used to look like this, and now it looks like this because you have this tool, and it was replaced this other legacy tool, and we used all this language, right? And so, back in those days, we talked about change management, right? And so human fear of change is pretty universal, right? I think it's part of our evolutionary makeup. And I think what's particularly scary about this moment is what I was saying is, like, we don't even know what the end state is, right? Like, I mean, maybe we couldn't have envisioned at some point, again, I'm old enough to remember when a mobile phone was just a phone and it wasn't, computing technology in my pocket. But now, let alone cloud and everything else that goes along with that. But we've had this it was even a gradual change over time where we just had more and more capability. And this feels very exponential, right? And it also feels, to your point, it is, calling up questions of, therefore, what is our role? If our role has been to do certain tasks or process information a certain way or do things like that, and now that can be done, exponentially faster, more efficiently, more comprehensively than the human brain can muster, then what is it? Like, that is an existential question, right? We have to answer. And so I think people being fearful is really natural. I will honestly say, though, like, I think we're in a phase right now where there's a lot of talk about efficiency or use of tools, and there's all this data coming out that people aren't using AI tools, and that's not surprising. Like, adoption's always hard. I mean, again, the reason there were teams like mine back on technology projects 20 years ago in ERP implementations was to get people to use them the right way, right? I mean, that was sort of why you did change management or you did training or things like that. So this is no different. And it also feels overwhelming, scary. Not necessarily, I don't think companies are doing a beautiful job of making it cohesive or coherent, even in what they're asking employees to do. So that just adds to the level of fear and anxiety. I think that will over time start to shake out. And I think the reality is it will become something that people use as part of their jobs, no matter what that is. And to the degree it fundamentally changes those jobs, I think that's to be seen. And I think we have to figure what that is. I mean, I'm really passionate about one topic that's getting a lot of press right now, which is what is the future implications for career pathing, especially for young workers. I have a personal vested stake in this because I have a lot of young people in my life, including my son who's a college student. But, I also have been mentoring young people. And I think it's such, there's early career experiences that are so formative to who we are as humans, not just in our work and our careers and our skills, but also in the relationships we form and places we decide to live and how we think about, starting like living in our communities. And so when we hear headlines about, AI is just taking all the entry-level jobs, that's not factually true, although unemployment is up for those groups for lots of reasons, AI being one of them. But also, if that were true, it's hugely problematic, right? Because people have to potentially learn a skill or a craft, et cetera. And maybe it's done in a different way, right? Maybe it's not the same way as we train people historically. And this can be all kinds of professions, right? So, I think we have to be thoughtful about that. And so whatever the disruption is happening, especially as it relates to people's careers and jobs, looking for ways to be thoughtful about how this technology comes into being, given it's going to be ubiquitous. I mean, so we're saying all this, and yet it's also going to be ubiquitous in a minute, right? Like, it's going to be everywhere, and it's going to be everywhere even faster. So therefore, what does that mean? And how do we make sure we, even if careers and jobs and everything else change pretty radically, that, people still have meaningful work to do, and that they have meaningful work at every stage of their growth in their life.
So you and I are both positive people. We've lived through a lot of technological transitions. And let's say, to your point, AI is ubiquitous, and let's say it's 2035, not 2025. If you're taking the over on the side of AI augmenting but not replacing humans and contributing in a positive way to work, what's one thing that's different about work when you have kind of that ubiquitous companion? Will the org chart change? Compensation? We derive meaning at work a different way? What's Tracy's view of the world?
I mean, I do think a lot of those things will happen. I think the org chart will change. I think you're already starting to see this, where you think about how the work gets done and you think about agents doing work instead of humans. I think maybe we won't even, I'm going to be curious to see, and I'm sure there's going to be companies that won't even have org charts, right? Because some of this is, at some point, you could end up in a world where there's less hierarchy. You could end up in a world where there's more of a seamless agentic human interaction. And there's things we cannot even imagine. And I'm sure there'll be permutations of those throughout. What I care about is, though, I mean, the reason I do what I do is because I think work is meaningful work, and that can look a lot of different ways, right? It can be knowledge-based work and sitting in front of a computer. It can be work at your local restaurant. It can be work, in all forms, and is essential to the human experience. I think meaningful work is essential to the human experience. And, there's been philosophers who've been talking about this for, centuries, right? So I think that's still true, right? And I think the opportunity is, even in the most basic sense, is there's lots of parts of work that don't necessarily help derive that meaning, right? And I don't even mean like purpose-driven work. That's another subset or element of this. I just mean, whatever I do every day, am I bringing the best of myself to that work? And we all have had jobs. I mean, at every level, we all have parts of our job where we're like, you know what, someone else, like an agent could do this way better than me and way faster than me. And it's not even the best use of my time, right? That happens every day to me, right? So I would welcome, and I think all of us would welcome that, right? If it then means that I can spend the time doing the work that only Tracy can do or the work that only Dan can do. I mean, it's interesting about we have this conversation because I have to tell you, as a leader in HR, I've spent so much of my time coaching everybody from my team, HR business partner on my team, up to the CEO of the company or others. What is only the work you can do? Right. I mean, that is a fundamental part of coaching, actually, for me, has been like, what is only the work you can do? Because we all get sucked into all sorts of different things, right? That may or may not be the best use of our time and the best use of our brain and the best use of our skills. And so my hope is that, this sort of agentic human relationship, if we want to call it that, um, can help with that, can actually help a human focus more on what they can do. Now, the challenge, and you sort of already alluded to this, is that we haven't done a great job of figuring that out. Hence why I've spent, a couple decades coaching humans on how to do that now, right? And so that is the risk, is that we haven't figured out how to do that. And we haven't been that great at it to begin with. And now we're adding this, this promise of something, which is going to be, is game changing for sure on top of that. And I think that's why you hear us swing to like, well, we just won't need humans to do that, or we just will get rid of this role, or we'll do like, because that's sort of the mantra we've been operating in. If it's because so much of the AI dialogue so far is all about efficiency. And our efficiency playbook for my entire career has been get efficiency, eliminate people, get efficiency, eliminate people, maybe if you're lucky, get efficiency, redirect people. Maybe that's like the best. And even that I think is usually under delivered in my experience. And so that's our only paradigm versus, hey, what if we get efficiency? What if we actually get better skills? Because by the way, AI is way better at a lot of things. So can we get the best of that? And then can we get the best of the human partners to those AI, whether it's agents or some other construct, so that humans can do the work that humans can do? And realize we still have to figure what that is, right? I don't think that's exactly obvious right now on what that looks like. And I think that's also what's really scaring people because it is so uncertain.
You had me at work is central to the human condition. I think that's something that is going to shape a lot of these important conversations that we as leaders are going to be having with employees. And we need to be prepared that our relationship with work is going to change fundamentally. And I want more employees to take advice from Tracy and believe that, when you remove the parts of your job that maybe are, we call it the 3Ds, dull, dirty, or dangerous, maybe there's actually a better version of work that maybe is kind of, you'll derive more meaning from that work. It'll help you define your why you were put on this planet. Right. Maybe when some of the drudgery associated with work goes away.
Totally. And I think also being thoughtful about like, where do people need to do things to help develop their skills and where do they don't? Like, what does that actually look like? Right. Because I do believe, I'll just use one example, right? So if you're an entry-level HR person, right, you might be in recruiting and maybe you spend a lot of time writing job descriptions. Well, there's no reason to write a job description anymore. There's absolutely no reason. By the way, anyone listening, you should never write a job description and consider doing that because you don't need to. Yeah, I can be excellent at that, right? And has already been excellent for quite a while. So they have to ask the question by writing a job description over and over again? Probably not. But do you need to know what a good one looks like? Yes. Can you get that in a different way from learning? Yes. Can you even learn from AI how to do that? Great. Even better. Right. So then how would I use an entry-level recruiter? Well, I want, in a world where bots are talking to bots and sort of application and like this, it's this sort of, those who in the recruiting world are listening, like it's really painful right now because we're just getting noise in sort of looking for people looking for jobs. And it's very frustrating for candidates and frustrating for companies. So what is a better use of that person spending time with candidates or whatever that could be to develop a skill around recruiting, which we still think I still believe humans have a role to play in, even as we automate a lot of things around it, that would be a better use of that entry-level person's time. And that's just one small example. You could extrapolate that across any industry at any level of career development and figure out that. I mean, honestly, I've been in a world of work where every time I've been a manager, I've been a working manager, where I have a day job and I have a manager job. Well, if I can more of my day job can go away, I can actually work on developing my higher order leadership skills, my higher order management skills, which, if we're being honest, are often side of desk kind of focus, right? And versus really what it takes to be the leader who creates a high performing team by being demonstrating great leadership, right? That would be meaningful as well as examples. So again, there's examples across the career pipeline, but it's about being thoughtful about what that looks like and where you need to build a skill by doing versus leveraging an agent or other mechanism to do for you, or even you can learn from it and you can focus again on the work that's going to really be the most meaningful.
Tracy, unbelievably, we're about out of time, but I'm not letting you off the hot seat without answering one last important question for me. I mentioned in your intro that you're now teaching a course on human capital strategy at Chicago Booth School, and you are in the catbird seat. You're getting to have these very authentic conversations with the future CHROs. What's top of mind for them? What are they asking you? What shows up? What anxieties do they have? But also, where are they optimistic about the future of work?
Yes, it is such a privilege to be teaching right now. I mentioned that I flirted with that early in my career. Now I get to do it in a very different context. But I love working with students, and I'm working with, again, these are very seasoned professionals, by the way, who are aspiring to be chief HR officers and are very well into their career to achieve that. And I think this is worrying people at all levels. Like, I don't think there's a single CEO or CHRO or CFO or SVP of HR who's not thinking about this every day. The challenge we have right now, as we've talked about, is there's so much uncertainty and it's coming so fast. And we're flying the plane and completely changing the entire configuration at the same time. It's not that we're even just changing an engine, like we're changing, would be insane in itself. We're changing the entire, like the plane's not even going to look the same. And we still have to fly it. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge I see when I talk to my students or my peers. I'm not in the seat at the moment, so I have the privilege a little bit of sitting outside and watching. But I also have a lot of empathy for people who are in it. And I talk to my friends I talk to every day. And it's that all of this is coming, at the same time you're dealing with everything else we talked about, right? A complex geopolitical environment, the threat of recession or not, whatever your own normal day job, looking at the competition, trying to find new customers, expanding, maybe doing an acquisition, like all the things, it's all happening at the same time. And the other pressures that a chief HR officer has, or a future aspiring chief HR officer has, haven't gone away. If anything, they've been as complex as they've been in the last 5 years, and you have AI on top of it. And so one of the things that, this is why I often, have a lot of empathy. So even though my class is about strategy and how to create a really compelling human capital strategy, we spend an entire class on culture. And even in that one class on culture course, actually 2 courses on culture, one of which I spend half the course on talking about mental health in the workplace, because it's a personal passion of mine, but it's also something that companies have really had to lean into, especially in these last, several years, because that's also the reality. So, and just on a side note, I worry even about my students and my profession a little bit, and leaders in general, but HR in particular, because we've been carrying this load now for years of everything we've been talking about, and AI is on top of that too. So, having to re-engineer the plane, help fly it while you're reconstructing it in turbulent weather is extremely difficult. And in doing that, when haven't slept enough or haven't taken care of yourself enough, and you have all the pressures of others who are also dealing with some of this depletion, I think is a risk. And so again, I'm a very optimistic person, and I think there's tremendous value that this will deliver to organizations and individuals, because it will alleviate some of that if we can do it right, which I'm actually really excited about. But we also need the headspace to figure that out. So at the end of the day, I show up for my students and everyone with a lot of empathy, because it is a lot to juggle, to say the least.
Okay, one last question for Professor Tracy, and then I'm really letting you off the hot seat. Really this time. Do you, so just really curious, how do you use AI maybe as a teaching tool? And then to what extent do you have policies around fair use of AI for your students?
So Chicago has policies around this. So I just use their policies. And I will say, I think, but the policies, I feel like what my tiny little view is that both being a professor now and having also a student in college myself is like, I think the policies have caught up pretty quickly. I think people understood that it's not like, you can't just say, don't use this. It doesn't make any sense. That'd be like saying, remember how they said you couldn't use a calculator and then you could use a calculator and things like that. Um, so how I used it, and I will tell you, it was a game changer. I mean, I got invited to teach this course, and I had a pretty short time to create it. And creating a course, an 8-class course from scratch. I mean, I'm not a professor. I had a framework I've always used for human capital, which I was able to employ and feel very passionate about using. But to do research on just like, okay, what is the most, recent article about trends in human capital? Or what is the most recent, article on, building a case around, okay, a company that had to transform its culture and how it did that, or a company that's, really thinking differently. I mean, there's a model that's out there around if you're thinking about talent, like, do you build, buy, borrow, or bot? Right? I had to use it to be able to build my reading list, mostly my pre-reading for my students, and I was very transparent with them about that because it was important, of course, with a lot of intervention, right? It's just a tool to kind of say, help me go find articles in the world, because that would be very hard to do, and you see it's exponentially easier to be able to do that. So I mean, we would probably consider that hyper search, right? Maybe not in hyper, just like better search than using Google. But I'm super grateful for that because it allowed me to be able to get the course developed. And that is again tip of the iceberg. I mean, I know you've had guests on to talk about AI in higher education, and I'm super curious to see how that evolves too, because it's certainly fascinating.
Check out the conversation with Dave Marchick, who's the dean of the business school at American University.
Great.
Talking about they have a degree just dedicated to AI, using AI at work. Just fascinating conversation. This was not intended to be an ad for your course, but can future CHROs sign up for Professor Tracy's course?
They absolutely can. Yeah. So there's a cohort. And what's lovely about the course is it's like many months. I just have one of the many courses and it's a great cohort. So I was like the 4th course in, and my students told me that they loved getting to know each other really well. So they learned from each other, as well as a variety of professors who are both academic and more like people like me, practitioners. So yeah, if you actually go to my LinkedIn, you'll see I posted, we were just, and there was an in-person gathering. It's virtual, so people can be anywhere. I even had an international student, but there was an in-person gathering a few weeks ago, which I was super excited to be a part of. So if you go to my LinkedIn, you'll see, and it actually has a link in there, or you can just Google Booth and their future Chief HR Officer program. And I'd love to have you as part of the class. It's been really great.
That would be wonderful. And I can't promise that you won't now have a wait list. This has been excellent. And gosh, you have an open invite now. Come back and hang out, and maybe we'll actually talk about some of the topics that we had planned.
Oh, Dan, it was a true pleasure. I think we could have, kept going.
We went way late, but it didn't matter. It was so worth it. Thanks again to Brian for connecting us.
Brian. Oh my gosh. And if you haven't, again, another plug, go listen to Brian's episode.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Tracy, amazing work. Good hanging out. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Good stuff. Well, that is all the time and more that we have for this week on AI and the Future of Work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.